I welcome all of you to this, what promises to be a really interesting session, because we've got three of, how would I say, really brilliant writers from Latin America across the continent. Well, I mean, Venezuela and Colombia, of course, are neighbors, and it's the Caribbean, Argentina more to the southern cone. As has been pointed out, today's session is, so I was very interested in seeing that you're saying it's a focus on Spanish, because of course Latin America has more languages than just Spanish, and of course Portuguese being the other colonial language, and the number of indigenous languages in which literature is being created. So, but of course, it's also known that Latin American literature today is living a moment literally of a second boom. If the first boom was in the 60s, one can sincerely speak of a second boom, so to say. So I must tell you all that Kerala is one place where Latin American literature is really well read, and I mean, it's translated. The continent is known for its politics, and in a cricket crazy nation, I think Kerala stands out for its football fans. And so they're basically divided in the football powerhouses of Argentina and Brazil. Yeah. In fact, I remember a video which went viral, I think it was a couple of years back, where I think it was the Kollam district, and there was a fist fight. The people got into fights because one side was supporting the Argentina team and the other one was supporting the Brazil team. So that's the kind of passion Kerala has towards Latin America. And so it's a great place to be having this session. But as the synopsis of the session has also pointed out, can we really talk of Latin America as a continental identity? Geographically, of course, and politically, today we speak of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is about 33 countries. And these countries are kind of divided between the Spanish America, the French Antilles, the Dutch Antilles, the British Caribbean, the Lusophone world, which, as you can see, are imperial artifacts. But there is no doubt that beyond this imperial geopolitical kind of division, there is a continent which has shared histories, shared cultures, but also a diversity, variegated in its geography, in its social strata, in its racial makeup. I mean, it's an amazing continent. And I think for that reason, we find the writing coming out from this continent so akin to what perhaps the Indian writers also have to grapple with. But I remember the Mexican writer Jorge Volpi, who had come to New Delhi to inaugurate a conference that we had held on Latin America and India. This was in 2023. And Volpi said that Latin America an enormous fiction? No, is it an enormous fiction? So how do you writers, I mean, of course, even if it's a fiction, it's a resistant fiction, because the idea of Latin America keeps coming up. So when you think of the boom writers, it's Latin American writing. Even up to Roberto Bolaño, he considered himself a Latin American writer, talked about himself as a Latin American writer, though he was a Chilean with a Mexican past and started living in Spain, I think, later. So I was wondering, how do you all look at the idea of Latin American literatures? Do you people feel as a part of this continental identity? Or do you think that the writers are more atomized now? That you're kind of writing more as islands and rather than the continent, And is it at all plausible to speak, therefore, of Latin American literature? So I'd like to begin with your thoughts on that. Would you like to start?
Well, hello everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you again, the festival, for this invitation. It's great to be here with you and with my colleagues. And I don't know, maybe when I live in Venezuela for the first 34 years of my life, and when in the festivals or something, they ask me about this Latin American identity, I never felt it really. No, it was like something given for me. It's not. It wasn't something that I was really aware of. But when I had to leave my country and live in Paris and then in Spain, then I felt really Latin American, because when two Latin American people find each other in Europe or United States or even here, we recognize each other immediately, and there's a bond, and there's a really quickly friendship in that comes out in 2 minutes. And I think it's really interesting to see that the Latin American label is something that maybe you experience when you are not in Latin America. No, um, when we speak about literature, I think that it's a little bit different, because I think we're living in a time, in a society where the subjects and the writings and the motives are really in a way different, but you can establish also connection between Venezuelan writers and a writing from Romania. So I don't think that the label Latin American literature works or fits really fine, because you can find examples of Latin American literature in other literatures, maybe even from India or from other parts of the world. No? And I think what we call the Latin American identity, besides the Spanish language and I don't know how to say indigena,
Indigenous.
indigenous background, I think is more related to political, economic, and instability.
Okay.
When you compare it with the so-called First War, no? And
Yeah.
that's it for me. I don't know if
And-
my colleagues.
And Pilar, would you like to?
And I think there's a category
Yeah.
of Latin American literature as seen from Europe. Yeah, as soon as you hit Europe, you're a Latin American writer, and you're expected to behave as a Latin American writer. Yeah, I've been asked, as a Latin American writer, how come you don't write about violence? Yeah, like what I said yesterday a bit about this. And I do write about violence, just not what Europe expects a Latin American writer should write about. Yeah, but I must say that I do feel like a Latin American writer, and I want to tell you about this. I grew up in Cali as an outsider because I didn't fit the social norms of a woman from Cali. Yeah. Then when I went to study in Bogota, which is a bigger city, more diverse, I started to fit in. But when I really fitted in was Rodrigo and I were invited to an event called Bogota 39, which they invited 39 writers under the age of 39 of all over Latin America, from the States, yeah, to Argentina. And there I felt for the first time at home. There were other 39 writers as me, you know, that maybe grew up like me. And I felt we were like a generation, though Latin American literature is not one. It's not what Europe wants us to be, but it's very diverse, yeah? And I think mm, before that, um, all Latin American literature had to go first to Spain, and then once it was in Spain, we got to read. I got to read an Argentinian writer in Colombia or a Mexican writer in Colombia. Yeah, but after that, there was like like there were born a lot of small presses and publishers, and they started publishing all over Latin America without going to Spain first. Yeah, and the first one of these presses was Norma. You remember Norma, that all the Latin American writers could be published in Latin America and we could read each other. Yeah?
Which publishing house is this?
It was Norma. It was a Colombian publishing house that closed, but I think, and it was big. It was all over Latin American, and we started to reading each other. Yeah, but now, though Spain, it's where if you want to be very successful, you need to go to publish. Yeah, there are small publishing houses that publish a Mexican writer in Argentina, a Colombian writer in Mexico, you know, and so we, because of that, we have like a bigger map of what we really are as a literary continent.
And as a community of writers.
Yes.
As a community of
Yes.
writers. Wow, very interesting, yeah.
Hi all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for attending. Thank you, my colleagues, to be here. Well, I certainly agree with all that my colleagues said. I think there is a political will of Latin Americanism that I share because we have a similar colonial and violent experience. In the case of literature, of course, there are many aesthetics, but one big problem is the access of the authors from different countries, because in general it happens that the big publishing house, they have their headquarters in Spain. So, for instance, an author from Bolivia publish in this publishing house, the publishing house publish this author only in Spain and in Bolivia. It happens the same. An Argentinian author is published in Spain and in Argentina. So sometimes you have a lot of problems to access. You are really close in a neighbor, but you have a lot of problems to access to that authors. So it's really important the local publishing houses. Many times there are authors that now are having these strategies of publish in each country their text. But in my case, that I write science fiction, I think that nowadays there is like occurring like a connection between the countries because we have the same problem that in the past the readers couldn't relate science fiction with their own history. Like writers of science fiction that are like 10 years older than me tell me that when they started writing, they put their books in the sci-fi section, and the readers say that, but how come a Latin American author is in the sci-fi section? She should be in the Latin American section, because there was this idea that in the north, in the global north, like people have a more direct access to progress and technology, so they have like a legitimacy to envision the future and to speculate about technology, where our countries, as we import the technology, we also import the writing about that. But nowadays there is a big wave of Latin American science fiction trying to think our own experience with technology and our own relation with our future and how the future was thought in a mainstream culture. And in that case, there is happening a big connection between sci-fi Latin American authors nowadays.
I to add something. And there's language, you know?
Yes,
There's
yeah.
Spanish. Yeah, we speak many languages in Latin America, but we speak Spanish. And like yesterday or the day before, somebody from India was telling me that they can't understand each other. They have to speak in English, though they lived 4 hours away. Yeah? We can live 8 hours away and we understand each other completely. Yeah?
No, of course. I think the language is a very big unifying factor. And yeah, you're very right. I mean, I'll tell you my personal case. I could not speak to my grandchildren for a very long time because they are Telugu speaking. And I don't know Telugu. Until the children started going to school, I could not speak to my own grandchildren, and now I speak to them in English. So in India, the multilingualism is absolutely, I mean, the way it plays out in our daily intimate lives and how it connects, I mean, it's something which is fascinating. And the kind of plunder of indigenous cultures and languages that was done by the Spaniards in Latin America, I think that gradual Hispanization has made language a very common factor for all of you. And I think, I don't know, a plus or a minus, but yes, it's different from the role of English in India. Very, very different, of course. But however we look at it, there is no dispute on the fact that the region has a strong literary and cultural history. So we can speak of, as I was saying, that apart from the colossal figure of Jorge Luis Borges, of course, which I think all of you Latin American writers in a certain way pay obeisance to, or many pay obeisance to, there is also the immediate history of the boom writers. And, for us, even till today, I would say, Latin American literature is so closely identified with the 80s and 90s and the boom of the 60s, which came here, in the 80s and 90s, and magical realism at a time. I think Homi Bhabha has said it, that it became the literary language of the emergent post-colonial world. And that's how Latin America actually came into world attention, apart from great figures like Borges. But as I was saying, I think today Latin American narrative fiction particularly is going through a second boom, and you represent that boom in a certain way. There's a rich array of writers who are available to us in translation. I think that's one major difference from earlier times to now, that you are all getting immediately translated into not just English, but various language. So this, what I would like to ask you is, what are the current literary tendencies? I mean, magical realism was a node, one big tree, but I think today we think of more in terms of hubs or more in terms of nodes, so you have the neo-Gothic, you have the ecological sci-fi, you have your, Pilar's, explorations of intimacy, of desire, and you have Rodrigo's novels, which are, the two of them, and the short stories, of course, which look at this society in the chaos and, making sense of the world around you. So I was just wanting to ask you, that how do you locate your own fiction in this very, very cross-pollinating kind of a scenario?
I think the boom was very male-centered. Yes, and I think nowadays in Latin America, the most interesting writers to me nowadays are women. Yeah, and I think we're reading very strong and original and fantastic female writers in Latin America. And I think they're doing discoveries. For example, when I was asked in Europe several times in several interviews, how come I don't write about violence? I thought I do, but in a more intimate way, the violence from inside the house, yeah, or more subtle violence, not the one of the war. And I thought I've tried to write about the violence outside, but I couldn't do it, yeah, until I read Nona Fernandez. I don't know if you've read her, yeah, The Twilight Zone, yes. And I said, if I was going to write about the violence from the outside, as I don't know, the boom did it, or all the writers did it, I would do it as she did. I feel like she showed me something, yeah. And what she did is she wrote about the violence of the dictatorship, Pinochet's dictatorship, about the desaparecidos. How do you say desaparecidos? About the missing, yeah, in a way that was very personal, from the point of view of a young girl in high school, of a young lady in university, of a mother, a middle-class mother. You know what I mean? A very personal take on what this violence does personally to you. Yeah, so I guess that's what I can say, that I think it's happening that's different from before. Yeah?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the women writer has the leading role right now in literature. And you can see that also is interesting how what Michel has been said, and Pilar, Spain is like the principal market for literature in Hispanic, for Hispanic writers, but I think the translations in English accompanied with prize like the Booker Prize or the National Book Award in United States and England has a major impact in the internationalization of Latin American or other parts of the world authors. You know? It's the recent case of the Argentine writer Gabriela Cabezon Cámara. She just won the National Book Award, and Samantha Schweblin has won the National Book Award. We have Pilar Quintana, who was shortlisted for the National Book Award. We have this phenomenon of Mariana Enriquez. He's like a Latin American. And you have Mariana Enriquez, he's like a rock star
Oh, yeah, yeah.
all over the world with his short story collections of ghost and Gothic literature.
Yeah.
You have the case of Monica Ojeda,
Yeah.
who mixed
Myth
the mythology of her own country with Gothic literature.
Yeah.
And there's many interesting things that are happening right now. And I will add, I think for what I concern is the literature of the writers that have to lead their countries, and it's a literature of migrants, of hybridization of cultures, and I think it's very important right now in Latin American literature. But I always have the feeling that if you look enough in other countries and other cultures and literature, you will find the same subjects. That's why I'm always reluctant to establish like a pattern. You know?
Hi, well, many things. Yes, I agree with my colleagues that it's not, well, it's not that there weren't female writers in the past, but they didn't get attention as the prominent canonical boom authors. But I also find interesting that as there are more women in the canon, also it changes how the canon is read, because like Borges, as a big example, he was like had this way of reading literature as a patriarchal way. Like you need one father of the literature that has to kill his like an Oedipical device, kill the previous father of literature, and it's always about having the big king of literature. And now like doesn't work like that. It's like allows more diversity, in not having a patriarchal understanding of literature, and also that changed how literature is read, and I find it really interesting. But yes, I recall what we were talking before, that also there is like a commercial label of Latin American literature that sometimes it's problematical for Latin American writers. That happens with magical realism. That happened to me being translated to French or English, that they will put magical realism in the description of the book. And I say, but I don't write magical realism. And the editor says, okay, but we have to sell books, so we'll put somehow the word or in the illustration of the cover, a yellow flower that evokes to Garcia Marquez, that I understand. But yes, I mean, we are standing in the back of giants, these authors that allowed us to think universally from our regions. But it happens also that problematic relation with that became such a big commercial label, and the literature that is evolving and changing all the time.
No, absolutely. I think while magical realism and the boom writers did bring world attention to Latin American writing in general, but it also kind of limited and the decontextualized reading of their novels, actually, which happened particularly in the metropolitan academia, completely decontextualized from Latin American history. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to see what you're saying, and so I'd kind of like to sum up what you people have said and, before we move forward, that Latin American literature today is more operating in diverse hubs and diverse nodes. And the most notable node there is the presence of this array of women writers. And as you're very rightly pointing out, it's not as though there were no women writers earlier. If you think of Elena Garro and Elena Poniatowska and all these people who were contemporaries of Cortázar, well, not Cortázar, but Marquez, etc., then one would think that there are. In fact, I must say that yesterday in the session which Pilar had with Meena Kandasamy, she has mentioned the huge work that she has done in collating and making a compilation of women writers from Colombia from colonial times to now. And I mean, and that must have been a great really a great experience. And the fact that you have put in some 97 women authors in these various compilations that you have made, I mean, yeah.
Something that it's happening all over, you know.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm reading classical writers from Argentina, female writers like Sara Gallardo, yeah, and it is because we're, as Michel said, we're reading the canon differently nowadays, and I think this is because the new ways of Latin American literature.
Yeah, no, absolutely, undoubtedly. And also I was thinking that this move, the neo-Gothic, you know, how it is so dominated by women writers, no? And why not? I mean, after all, Mary Shelley and so on and so forth, there's that legacy. And I also found very interesting the mention that you make of literature in Spanish or Latin American literature being written by the immigrant writers, not only somebody like you who lives in Spain and many others, but also so many writers of Hispanic origin, of Latino origins who are living in the United States and very rightly should find a place in the canon of Latin American writers, even if they are writing in English. I mean, I was thinking of, ¿cómo se llama? The Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde.
Junot
Yeah,
Diaz.
Junot Diaz. I mean, he's just a wonderful writer, and so many others.
There's a writer from El Salvador, Javier Zamora, who wrote this autobiographic novel entitled Solito. He's wonderful. He narrates his own experience as an illegal immigrating in the United States when he was 9 years old. It's amazing. It's written in English, but it's a mix up with Spanish from El Salvador. It's really interesting.
Yeah, so that kind of opens the contours of Latin American writing to other latitudes, to other, you know, so that's also very interesting. You know.
And I think there's something interesting happening, and I think it's that they put a tag now on literature. Like they call what we're writing tropical Gothic, yeah?
Oh, I see.
But if you read the Vortex,
Yeah.
and if it was written nowadays, they would say it's tropical Gothic. Only then they didn't say that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah,
what you were saying. You know, my novel, The Beach,
Yeah.
in France, they said it was magical realism.
Yes,
Yeah?
yeah.
And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I read the articles, and it's because it had a shaman. Yeah,
Ah.
the protagonist didn't go to a doctor
Yeah.
because in her town there were no doctors.
Yeah.
Yeah, she went to a shaman,
Yeah.
and for us that's not magical.
Of
it's
course.
just realism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess there's a need to tag and to name things that maybe always happen naturally, but they didn't put these tags
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that even today, I think, as you were saying, perhaps not. I mean, in India also for a very long time, as I said, even till today, Latin American literature is conflated with the magical realist style. And that is why I said it's so important to have a dialogue with you all. And in that sense, I think the curatorial team of Hortus, some of young members are sitting right here, Aisha and others, you know, I think they've done a wonderful job by getting you all here, and we are really, really grateful for this lovely dialogue that we are having. Yes, a big applause to you all, sincerely. Yeah, and for me, although I am supposed to be an expert in Latin American literature in India and so on and so forth, but sincerely, reading you all for the first time, I've read La Perra, and I've read Dengue Boys, and of course Rodrigo's I've read a lot more, because initially I was told that I'm going to do a session only with him. It's been such a discovery, and I really encourage all of us to make that jump now from Garcia Marquez, with due respect, of course, to to DC Books, who had popularized those books, and maybe think in terms of translations of newer authors into the diverse languages of India, because although the translations in English are there, but frankly speaking, our great majority of readers in India still read in our what are known as the regional languages. So it's extremely important that you are translated. I mean, I'm reading you in Spanish, or maybe another person is reading in English, but I think if we really need international global circulation in terms of India, it would have to be in the diverse languages of India, and we'll have to see how we can do that. So I'd like to come to this problematic area of translation. Um, yeah, so while it gives you visibility, it gives you global circulation, but the expansion of your literary markets, one could say, has also kind of shrunk literary possibilities. Now, let me say what I'm saying. So, for example, in the 1990s at least, we were told that the Latin American writers had started writing in a way which would be easy for the translator, which would be easier for them to be presented in translation. No, say, so the idea was that perhaps it's changing the syntax of the Spanish language. Now, this may not be correct, but it may be true for a few. Like you could say that there would be writers today who are writing for a future adaptation for Netflix, etc. But the fact is that those long winding sentences in 100 Years of Solitude, which go on for 2-3 pages, that kind of characterize the Latin American Baroque. I mean, the translators, it was, at least we were told that the writing has changed because of this desperate requirement to be translated and fit into the utopia of literary inclusion. So what would you like to say about your translations, and how they help you, but also how they might be limiting the idea of Latin American narrative fiction?
Well, I had many ideas and I forgot what I was going to say. No, I think it's so important, the translators, like the aim, like the narcissistic aim of some authors is that they want to be untranslatable, but the mission of the translator is just translate it. And Borges said that the proof that a book can be translated is that most of the readers read like the Iliad or the Odyssey in a language that wasn't ancient Greek, and people still enjoy it. But I think, yes, there is an ethical significance nowadays, especially of the translator, to allow us to make bridges into cultures. I was thinking what's happening now, but due to the commercial pressure that some authors, Latin American authors, write in English because it's easier to publish. They get like bigger yes, market, and they get better paid, but it certainly like completely eliminates how the syntax makes the thinking and the aesthetic of Latin American literature and Spanish in general, especially in a moment where there are many fascist countries that are banning speaking in Spanish, as the US, for instance. So there is like a political importance of keep our culture and our languages. So I think that is very important for Latin American writers to write in Spanish. Yes, and also it's happening in philosophy. Sometimes I want to read the authors that are not from the US, and they also write in English. That has obviously some pros, but like the language is also a way of thinking, and it's important to defend it. But in my case, I always had a beautiful experience with translators. Of course, there are things that are really hard to translate, but it's part of their job to do it. But I was thinking, for instance, Bolaño, that you are talking about writers that want to reach a translatable language, but Bolaño writes really in a Spanish syntax way, like kilometric sentences that are impossible to translate to English, that is more concise. And despite that, he is the most important and famous Latin American writer. So I think that when a writer is good, it doesn't matter how they write. And the mission, Natasha Wimmer is the translator of Bolaño. She's a brilliant translator. And also it's happening now that there is a big wave of translators that are also having prominence because their work of translating Latin American authors to different languages. So I think that, yes, translators are really important. Now, luckily, they're having even more relevance because they're starting to appear in the cover of the books. And yes, that's what I have to say.
And I think there was like the writers that were translated from Latin America were like the authorized Latin American writers from an outsider's point of view. Yeah, but it left out that situation many writers that didn't fit in what was expected. Yeah, I can think of a writer, an Argentinian writer that I adore, that it's not known even in Latin America, which is Antonio Dalmaceto, and maybe he wasn't translated or celebrated as the boom writers because he wrote in a very sparse prose, like, I don't know, Hemingway kind of way.
Okay.
Yeah, or I can think in Julio Ramón Ribeiro, whose stories were more realistic, yeah, different from magical realism.
Magical realism.
Yeah, so I think that might have
No, so
have
that's
happened.
it. Yeah. So I mean,
Yes.
it's true what you're saying that while translation, helps the visibility, but it also kind of limits in what comes out into the market. Yeah. Yeah, Rodrigo.
Well, I think to be
What comes out, but how are we seen as a continent? Yeah?
Yeah.
What they want to see in us.
Yes.
That maybe doesn't reflect who we are, but what they want to see.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the fact to be translated is a privilege because your work is able to reach different readers or audience. But also in my case, I think the relationship with my translators have improved my
Yes.
writing
Oh.
because I think the translators are the most accurate reader in the book system. No? I have been corrected in my Spanish by translators. So that doesn't, you don't write like that. And yeah,
Yeah, sometimes a translator asks you a question and you're like, oh, fuck, I fucked it there. Yeah?
yeah, it's like that. So I feel for me it was like a bless to be translated, and I think maybe unconsciously as a writer I tend to adapt my writing to what I imagine a wider audience, and sometimes I feel bad about it. But I saw a Gabriel Garcia Marquez interview about the writing process of 1,000 Years of Solitude, and he said that he doesn't matter to change one Colombian word or expression for an Spanish to be able to attain a wider audience. And I said, if Garcia Marquez did it, I can do it myself.
Too.
So
Yeah. No, you're very right. I think it's sincerely very interesting what you're saying. One, of course, the highlight of this thing is the presence, an array of wonderful translators. You know, early there would be only a Gregory Rabassa, but today you have an array of translators translating works from Spanish to English. And in India, also we have now been able to get people who are translating directly from Spanish into Indian languages. It's a small group of translators, but we are now developing into so I think it's really wonderful. I see the future really bright when it comes to translation of your works into our languages. I have to wrap up this wonderful conversation, but I want to ask you one question. Given the emphasis on narrative fiction, and our session today, of course, is on narrative fiction, considering that all three of you represent that. But there is also, do you think that the other genres of Latin American literature kind of get left out in this institutional world literature? And I'm particularly thinking of poetry, but also perhaps a genre as typically Latin American as the chronicle, La Crónica. For example, I was thinking of Pedro Lemebel. I mean, he's such a wonderful writer, but because his writing is, I mean, only his novel has been translated, which is a single novel that he wrote, but his chronicles, you know, he has got some 7, 8 books of chronicles. They have not been really translated. So so my last question to you, and before we throw it open to the audience, would be that this, the way Latin America is being included in the literary canon, is it at the cost of other genres which are actually not ancillary genres in Latin America? They're quite mainstream genres in Latin America.
No, I totally agree, and it's ironic because I think if some foreigner reader wants to know about Latin America, it is more important to read chronicles than fiction. Uh, you read Pedro Lemebel chronicles, Martín Caparrós chronicle, Leila Guerrero chronicles, and you will have a map about Latin America, the daily story of the current people that you cannot find in a work of fiction, no? And it's really sad. And I think we are living in under the empire of the novel. I consider myself more a short story writer than a novelist, and my short story collection hasn't been translated in French because in France they don't care about the short story. They only are interested in novels, and it's a shame.
I think nowadays, if you are a Latin American male writer from a city and you're white and you are heterosexual and you're cis, I think they wouldn't be so interested in your literature. You know, they like nowadays you better be a woman or black or gay or live far away. You know, that's like a tendency of the market, yeah. And I think we're missing something there. Not that we've always had that, but we shouldn't exclude any kind of literature.
I think it sometimes it maybe happens in the other end when in Argentina, I don't know, we read Indian literature that it's hard to reach it before a lot of filters, and the people that do those filters are really commercial oriented, and there are stupid stereotypes like people don't read short stories or poetry, and it's all tending to that homogeneity. But despite that construction, I think that literary tradition has their own drive that speaks by itself, and despite that, we still have great poets and short story writers and chronists that are also very prominent. In Argentina, we have Samantha, well, in Argentina, we have a big tradition of short story writing, Cortázar, Borges, and so on. And one of our boy, yes, and a lot of more. We have Samantha Schweblin, that is one of our biggest writers, and she's a short story writer. Even Mariana Enriquez is more famous for her novels, but she has more short stories than novels. And also Leila Guerrero, she's a chronist and also is one of the most prominent Argentine writers. So despite all the commercial and all type of constrictions, I'm optimistic about literature speaks by itself with the tradition of the genres.
So I think it was wonderful note. On this wonderful note, I throw open the floor to the audience, please, if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. At this rather uninformed question, so does there exist an Occidental tendency and an Oriental tendency in Latin American fiction? So an Occidental, Western inflected tendency that speaks of power, that speaks from a position of power and wealth, and an Oriental inflection which speaks from a position of lack of wealth and powerlessness. Like for instance, the hatred that is often directed against Spanish culture, like it happens in the US, could also be interpreted as a hatred against the second category, like the like the poor, the Oriental, the powerless, the Islamic hate, which has been exorcised from many cultures in Europe. So would you find such a binary? Because in India also this is a major debate. When you're writing to the West in an English idiom, in a European idiom, and you're writing to a first world audience, you essentially do not try to exorcise the poverty, but you try to showcase it. So does this happen in Latin America as well? That's my question. Thank you.
Can we have a couple of more questions and maybe we combine them? Sí, yo voy a traducir.
Okay. Actually, I wanted to ask this question because she had already referred to it. Like, how much does the indigenous culture influence your writing? Because indigenous culture, there must be indigenous culture. Does that have an influence on your writing? And how does it help in a widespread influence all over the world? The second question is the culture. How much does the local, one is I told you about the local culture, but as you said, it is not your short story writing, etc., and not so welcome in the European world like France, you said. I sort of felt like France have their own writers also, short story writers like Maupassant and all that. How come short story writers from the Spanish world are not so welcome? That is quite intriguing for me. And the next question, if you don't mind us, we have the same, I'm a French teacher, so we have the same problem in the French world also, because French has colonized France has colonized a number of countries. And the culture there, the language also, it's very different from country to country. But they are actually interiorizing all these stuff in their writing, and they are actually recognized all over the world. So what about Spanish writing? Is it the same? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, so la primera pregunta de este señor yo creo que se puede juntar con la primera pregunta de la señora sobre las culturas indígenas y la presencia, porque lo que dijo él es que sí hay dos tendencias, ¿no? Que hay una que él llama la tendencia occidentalizada y otra es que la tendencia oriental, que no lo entendí muy bien, pero se refería oriental a los desheredados, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que se puede mezclar la primera pregunta de la señora sobre los indígenas, etc. Y entendiste la segunda pregunta de la señora, que en Francia ya hay una presencia de grandes cuentistas, ¿no? Y hay una
about that, yes, Maupassant it's very important, but it's like way back. And contemporary writer, even a French contemporary writer, rarely writes short stories. And for other artists, I'm not gonna say impossible, but they are not interested at all in publishing short story, at least in France.
Yeah. So they talked about the empire of the novel. Yeah. So I will come to the question of the indigenous identity and the binary of the Oriental and the Occidental and the way you have framed it. Yeah. So that's one. Let's just answer that question. Yeah.
Well, we have a tradition of indigenous writing, yeah, but that has not been taught. I think in Colombia, we have a conversation that is starting to happen about it. Yeah, we're a mixed country. Yes, there's many complexities, and I think it's very different in Argentina. Maybe in Venezuela it's more alike, yeah, because our colonization and history are intertwined. Yeah, we were a whole virreinato together, so our history was one at the very beginning. But I was told in high school that in Colombia everyone has three bloods: Spanish, indigenous, and black, yeah, and African, yeah, and that maybe we couldn't be racist because of that, yes, but a person like me in Colombia is seen as white, yeah, mixed but I'm seen as white, and I have never experienced in my country, outside as a Latin American, yes, but in my country, I haven't been discriminated because of my skin color or where I come from, though my grandfather was an African Colombian, yeah, but I have never been discriminated, yeah, so it's very different if you're a mixed person born black in a black community that if you are a white mixed person born with all the privileges in a city, yeah, and I think our literature now it's looking into that, yeah, before it was a white male telling the story of the indigenous people and of the black people. Now you have black writers and indigenous writers telling their own story. Yeah, I've curated a collection of literature by women's writers. Yeah, and we've included indigenous black raizales, which our raizales are they're black, but they are from English background. Yeah, in the Caribbean. Yeah, and some of them are writing just to tell their own story to the white people. Yeah, so their stories are finally told with their own voices.
No,
Creole? What?
no, si son creoles.
Yes, they are Creole. They speak Creole and their mother tongue is
the
Creole. And
British,
when they go, yeah, they're British. Yes.
Yes, in Argentina as well, there is a myth that it is a white country, but it has a really rich tradition of the confluence of indigenous languages and cultures, and also what that could enter into the colonization and the language. For instance, there are a lot of words in Argentine language that we share with Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil that come from Quechua and Guarani and Mapuzungún, that are our original languages. So it's a story that must be reconstructed. We all have grandparents or great-grandparents that were indigenous, but it's an archive that was erased. And as Pilar was saying, now there is a will to have writers that talk about that heritage, and it's part of our culture and our literature. It's part of it.
This one.
I'm a doctor who lived in the US, and I have a book I've written which I would like to have translated to Spanish and Portuguese. And it's a non-fiction, and it is something that is a collection of many of my articles. I used to live in the US 25 years, so I'm kind of post-independence, multicultural person. And it is also related to a public health story in India, which is about the Indian railways. The fecal matter used to drop, and it was my efforts that got the green bio toilets on the Indian railway.
Wow.
And this is a story that talks to the developmental aspects in South America, the water, hygiene, sanitation. And I would love to know how and who I could get to translate my book. I have a copy if you want, but that's great.
No, I
It's
think
in English.
I can give you English. Yeah. I written in English and translated into Malayalam. It's called India Rescue. It has not been marketed well. I expect to do it very soon. And it is Rescue India is the title.
I think we really need to have a more of the South-South kind of translation projects and, of all sorts to get to know each other better. And I think, yeah, it should be a good idea to have your book translated. And I can also look into the possibilities. Yeah. I think with that, we'll have to come to a close of this wonderful session. I thank all of you. Thank you very, very much for this
I
absolutely...
would like to have one more question, last
Oh,
question.
okay.
If you permit me. I think this is very pertinent because, it's a very simple and straight question. Yeah. This is regarding the Nobel Prize in Literature. We haven't seen any Latin American or even Central American win a Nobel Prize since Vargas Llosa in 2010, right? We had many good writers, if I remember correct. Ricardo Piglia eminently deserved it. Much before that, Nicanor Parra was there. He lived for over 100 years, but nobody cared. And so many others are there. But if you look at the slightly younger crop of writers like Castellanos Moya or Guadalupe Nettel from Argentina, Uh, they are well translated, so they're well known. So probably in another 10, 15 years, we might hear about them. But recently I talked to a Spanish critic, Mexico. He's based in Mexico. So he was telling me, like, we don't have any serious writers who would deserve to be in that list of Nobel winners. But maybe over time we might have. I don't know whether this is a reality. I'm very curious to know what your perspective on this would be.
Que después del 2010 no ha habido un premio Nobel en literatura latinoamericana. Entonces él estuvo charlando con un crítico literario y dijo que, latinoamericano, que le dijo que hay grandes escritores, pero no hay. So you're saying that, that he told you that there are no serious writers? No, basically the question is about.
No, not serious writers. See, when I participate in the Nobel discussions, I get an impression that, we all know that the Nobel Prize is mostly Eurocentric, and it moves to the English-speaking world, and then once in a while to Asian countries. But in the last 15 years, Latin America and the Central American countries, like Rodrigo Rosa, I would have preferred that he gets one prize sometime soon, but then none of these names figure even in the discussions for the Nobel Prize. That's why I'm baffled.
Bueno, en resumen es que desde hace 15 años no ha habido un premio Nobel de América Latina. ¿Cuál sería la razón? En el resumen es esto. Ha mencionado varios nombres, incluso el último que es Rodrigo Rosa, etc.
Borges used to say that there was a yearly Swedish tradition that was not giving the prize to him. But I think that what gives prestige to awards is the awardees, the people that won it. And it's not that you have this entity that give the legitimacy of a writer. Like, if you, it's also, I mean, it's also hard that one prize that only can be given yearly can recognize the vast diversity of world literature, but I think for me it doesn't care the Nobel Prize. There are writers also that say it is a doom to win it, that if you win, the writers that win is that because they're horrible. So honestly, in my case, I don't care about it. I enjoy my most beloved writers didn't win the Nobel Prize. So of course it's really Europe-centered. But yes, I think it's not that important. I mean, if you are reading, as you are saying, Ricardo Pilla and Ray Rosa, and you enjoy them, it doesn't matter if they win the Nobel Prize. I mean, probably they would, Pilla, that already died, passed away, would enjoy to have the money of the prize because he had a lot of money problems, but yes.
I think the next Latin American Nobel Prize should be a woman, but I don't know who yet. No, I have some that I really like, but I think they need to age a bit and write some more.
I agree with my colleagues.
I think we end the session on this note, yeah? One more question, okay?
Okay, I just have a very simple question. So, let's say you write in Spanish and it gets translated into a specific language, then comes to India, it gets translated to a local language. So, as Spanish authors, what is your preference? What should be the intermediate language? Which is the language that you think is more honest when you know there are going to be more than one translations of this down the line? Will it be English? Will it be French? Should it not be any of those languages? Because let's say if I don't read or understand Spanish and I don't even read or understand a European language, I'm someone from India. So from your perspective, how should your literature or words reach me through which path? As what would be your preference? What would you like?
Some of my writing, some of my stories happen in Colombia's Pacific coast, where the majority of the population is black, and there's tensions between indigenous, blacks, and white people. Well, not white, mixed white people. Yeah? And when I was translated into English, I really like my translator because she's from the south of the United States, and I think she could get some of the tensions, racial tensions that happen there. You're asking something like that? Yeah.
Yes, basically I'm saying, what would be your preference? English, French?
No,
or-
we will translate directly from Spanish.
Yeah.
So we will. I'm sure.
They're
No, I'm sure
translating my
in
book.
Malayalam soon
They're
you'll have
translating my book
translators.
La Perra to Malayalam. So I don't know if they translated it, if they are
See,
translated
what
it from Spanish or from
Malayalam,
English.
that's the question actually. In Malayalam,
don't
it's
know.
coming from the English translations.
Okay.
So it's not a direct route. And I think that's precisely what he's asking, that if you have to have your literature translated into Indian languages. See, this is the thing in India, English is, it's a 10% people who read English, functional English. The rest of us read in Marathi, Bangla, Punjabi, and Urdu, and so on and so forth, in our
I think
language.
the language you have to be translated into, so you're widely translated, it's English. Oh, that's what our agents tell us, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we can close the session on this very optimistic note that we will soon have a woman Nobel Prize winner from Latin America, and that we will soon have direct translations of Latin American writing into our various languages. Thank you so much.